Okay. I do want to say that we have made some changes on the PowerPoint as we've fleshed out a few things that are probably not as reflective in the manuscript. So I apologize ahead of time for that. But we're going to try to stick with what we're proposing in the PowerPoint. Um, and go from there. And Nicolette's got a nice about 10-minute presentation, and we will leave lots of time for discussion after that. And then at the very end, Nicolette, I don't know if you remember, I have to put you in the waiting room a little bit while we do the private thing and then bring you back. Okay? All right, let's see it.
Yes, I will go ahead and share. Let's see. Um, Okay. So my dissertation will be Fat Talk, Body Image, and Relationship Quality, an Ecological Momentary Assessment Study. So female friendships are very important for women's health and survival. And fat talk is disparaging comments made by women regarding their own appearance. And this is something that's really common among women. Up to 93% of undergraduate women engage in fat talk. But fat talk is associated with a lot of negative harms like negative affect, body shame, pressure to be thin, and appearance comparisons, just to name a few. But it's also seen as this really functional thing in women's relationships where they can seek reassurance, vent guilt, consolidate in-group status. But some studies have shown that women can feel annoyance or manipulated by fat talk and sometimes prefer positive body talk. And so most studies have looked at fat talk with these kind of one-time self-report measures, and ecological momentary assessment, or EMA, is a way to look at fat talk in a much more like naturalistic and ecologically valid way. So we did a pilot study for my thesis where we had the sample of 24 undergraduate women through SONA who completed pre-test measures and then attended a Zoom training session to set up the technology and then completed EMA surveys 5 times per day for 3 days at some set times. And the results of the thesis showed that there was no correlation between any of the pretest measures and the EMA measures, no significant interaction between fat talk, the pretest social support, and then EMA relationship quality. But there was a significant interaction between fat talk, the pretest body dissatisfaction, and EMA body satisfaction, where we saw that body satisfaction was relatively stable from pretest, so similarly low or high during EMA when fat talk was low. But when fat talk was high, the EMA body satisfaction was high kind of regardless of the pretest, um, the pretest body satisfaction. So there were a lot of takeaways from this pilot study. The technology was a little like clunky and difficult, and streamlining that could improve adherence and being able to get a larger sample. Also, choosing no to have they had any fat talk ended the survey, which so having questions after both yes and no can improve adherence and also kind of give us more information so they can serve as their own controls. Also, participants reported some fat talk thoughts, so we can also examine those because those weren't expected. The pretest measures and the EMA measures were not very aligned, so we can also align those more. And we didn't have information on factors that might have influenced that relationship quality. So things like attitudes to about body image and appearance, and then also the general kind of conversations. And there also could have been some reactivity to using the term fat talk with participants, because now a lot of times people use negative body talk instead. So for the dissertation, we can again recruit undergraduate women through SONA and try to recruit a much higher number to account for the attrition that might happen with EMA. And then participants will can complete the pretest survey and EMA surveys 5 times per day for 3 days, using something called Survey Signal, where they would just click a link and they would be able to opt into the EMA notifications. And with Survey Signal, we can also do a randomized schedule, which we can increase. I'd love to hear your feedback on this time constraint because we can increase it to later for the undergraduate women. But we can do a randomized schedule, making it just a little more ecologically valid.
I would go ahead and think about what do y'all think about 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night? Because college students tend to stay up late like Doris does. Um,
Yeah, I was gonna say 10 o'clock is what I would extend it to.
okay, I agree.
And then so for the dissertation, the pretest measures, they'll have their individualized code. People track their responses over time anonymously. And then they'll give demographic and inclusion information, and then complete the negative body talk scale, the eating disorder examination questionnaire, body dissatisfaction subscale, and the contingencies of self-worth scale, appearance subscale, and then give the link to Survey Signal.
And then
Um,
back up 1 second, Nicolette. We did talk about a little bit this morning of counterbalancing those.
yes,
So
counter.
after demographics, is everybody okay with that? Reagan, you're muted, but I think you're saying
Yes.
yes. Yeah.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. That way we can maybe reduce missing data
Right,
issues.
yeah. Um, And then for the EMA measure, again, they would give their code and then answer if they've had negative body talk conversation with another person since the last notification. And they would be given kind of the same questions if they choose yes or no. So they'll be asked how many conversations, who initiated it, what was the like type of relationship, and then a brief like text box answer of the general content of the conversation. Then they'll answer the EDEQ, relationship quality, and then also if they've had fat talk thoughts or negative thoughts about their body, and if that happened before, after, or before and after the conversation. And if they click no, they'll just be prompted to answer these, thinking about kind of their most recent conversation about anything other than negative body talk.
And so if they've got multiple conversations for fat talk versus other conversations, they're always prompted, right, Nicolette, to think of the last conversation?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I ask a question here?
Yeah.
So I've been wondering if we want to, if it's meaningful for them to identify with like initials, like the person, if it's
Yeah.
a relationship quality thing. I was just curious, like if there's a person you tend to do this with, who you feel maybe safest with, like most comfortable. And do we want it? I wanted to just get some feedback about
Hmm.
that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was something I believe we did have that on the thesis, so it is something that we could add. The things that were taken out was just for like time purposes, but I think that that could be like an important thing to have if that's what yeah, what we agreed with.
So were they asked if they said friend, family, acquaintance, they were asked their initials?
Yeah, I think just to keep track of like is it the same person
Mhm.
also?
Okay, we just never took a look at that. Okay.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't know. It would actually almost be another project, but it might be kind of an interesting thing to have in the wheelhouse. I don't know.
Yeah, it'd be interesting data for a follow-up study if somebody wanted to take a look at that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great idea.
Um, and then so generally this is kind of our designs with the pretest survey and then the EMA survey and what we'll be examining. And I'll walk through each of these also in a second, looking at the negative BITOC scale and the fat talk amount that they're reporting, and then also looking at the EDEQs during EMA and at pretest, looking at the relationship quality during EMA and the contingencies of self-worth scale, and then also looking at these fat talk thoughts during EMA. And again, I'll walk through these now. So one thing would be the correlation between the negative body talk scale and number of fact talk conversations. And thinking back to the thesis, these two things weren't correlated. So these might not be correlated again because it could be that the negative body talk scale, this like one-time self-report measure, isn't getting at what's actually happening in everyday life. Then to look at this relationship, the EDQ, their body dissatisfaction when they're fat talking or when they're not fat talking. We would explore this. And we had talked about like a little while ago having this be more exploratory of an analysis rather than directional because we didn't look at this in the thesis necessarily. But we would be looking at their EDEQ during EMA with the fat talk conversations versus other conversations, and how these kind of compare to each other using multi-level modeling.
Does anybody want to pause here or go back to the visual? Okay.
And then looking at, again, these EDQs, but also bringing in that pretest EDQ. So in the dissertation, or in the thesis, we found that when fat talk was low, participants with high pretest body dissatisfaction had significantly higher EMA body dissatisfaction than those with low pretest body dissatisfaction. So like I said, they were kind of remaining similar. But when fat talk was high, both groups, low and high pretest body satisfaction, had low EMA body dissatisfaction. So they're feeling much more satisfied with their bodies, kind of right after fat talk. And so we could look at something similar to this, except it is slightly different because instead of looking at that low high fat talk, we would be examining fat talk versus other conversations here. But still looking at the fat talk and the pre-test body dissatisfaction and how that looks with the EMA body dissatisfaction. And then going on to looking at this relationship quality during EMA. So we would be looking at participants' feelings about relationship quality in either direction with fat talk versus other conversations. And again, this would be exploratory rather than directional because we didn't like look at this in the thesis. And so what we could look at here is their kind of relationship deviation score. So this is the question about the relationship quality. With 3 is this like neutral feeling, 5 is feeling much closer, and then 1 is feeling much more distant. And so we could look at if they're feeling really intense feelings, kind of either way, because the literature is mixed on how people feel about their relationship qualities after fat talking by using this formula. So it would be their score minus 3, this neutral set point, and the absolute value of that. So you can see here that the higher scores would mean more intense feelings, and the lower scores would be more neutral feelings about the relationship quality. And we can also look at this directional too, but really focusing on that strength. Then looking at this relationship quality and the CSWSA. We could examine, again, more exploratory, if their appearance self-worth and the fat talk versus no fat talk, that impact on relationship quality. So is there importance of appearance to them? Is that having an impact with fat talk on the relationship quality ratings? And then we can look at these like fat talk thoughts. Yes, fat talk versus no fat talk. Where we can, again, in an exploratory way, because this was just something that came up during the thesis, but we didn't necessarily examine it during the thesis. We can look at if they've had these negative thoughts about their bodies, and if it happened before, after, or both. And then look at that with if when they fat talked versus when they didn't fat talk with multi-level modeling.
Do you want her to go back to the big visual you all and talk a little bit from there, or do you want her to unshare?
I mean, I think I don't necessarily need to go back to the big visual, although I think that the what you did in this presentation clarifies things for me at least, with some of that. But I think I would like to go kind of step by step through each analysis because I have a couple of questions and then some concerns, mostly in that, I'm thinking really big picture. I'll just, say this is how I was approaching some of this is if part of this is like you have to apply and get ready to go to internship and submit this, we also I'm always concerned about doing a thesis that's going to be feasible and in the time that we have to get it done. I don't want this to go on for like 4 years. And this is monstrous. I mean, they're all great questions, but I'm just concerned a little bit about the feasibility. And I actually don't know if we need to ask all these questions and do so many exploratory analyses, um, and like all the multi-level modeling and some of that kind of stuff necessarily.
Yeah.
I'll just open and say that, right? Like that is actually one of my biggest concerns is that maybe we actually should just cut some of this and rein it in because I really want you to finish it and I want it to be something that's feasible that like you were able to do and also some of it that you could really do independently too, knowing that sometimes some of this thesis is completed while you're on internship and you're trying to like write this and finish it up. And so I love all of these questions, but maybe this is like the first dissertation that does some of this, and then somebody else also picks this up as, some of these follow-up questions as a master's or something else. I almost think it's like too much. I actually like some of my comments are like, I think we should just like cut this. I think we should cut this. I think we should cut this. Not because they're not good ideas or not, they're not well thought out, but because I want you to be able to finish and I want it to be a feasible project. And I think we have more than enough here to accomplish that. I don't
Can you
know.
can you go back to the visual? And Reagan, I'll be curious because the part that is new here
Uh-huh.
that I feel like is good, unless others disagree, is the looking at the fat talk compared to the other conversations.
I think that is one of the biggest new things. And I think in talking about that, and this will be reflected in some of my comments on the paper, then I think we need to make that more of the focus of the actual document because right now it just feels like we're revising and making some changes to the thesis when in reality, like, yeah, we are, but if that's really the focal point, then maybe that's what we need to focus on is identifying like, are there differences in fat talk versus other types of conversations? But there's not really discussion of that in the background of the paper right now, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
or
yeah.
even theoretically, why we would think that there would be differences in those and body dissatisfaction, right? Similarly, I
Yeah.
think like this is following up from the last one, but Doris brought up a lot about the self-worth and like that being a part of this like integrated kind of like idea of what might be driving, body dissatisfaction or relationship quality or things like that. But we don't really hear in the paper, like we don't really see anything about self-worth until you get to the methods and the
Uh,
proposed plan. And so I think like if those are going to be the two big, like I see those two things as the big changes here when I look at this picture. And so I think like if that's the driving force, then like we kind of know some of the answers and maybe we're going to replicate that with preliminary analyses with some of those early correlations that you mentioned in the proposed plans. But like those don't need to be like big parts of the analysis.
Mhm.
I don't know. I'll
what
be quiet for a
what are
second.
other no, I think this is good because we've just been building and building as opposed to
Yeah.
thinking about condensing and cutting.
Mhm.
I had the same thought about the contingency of self-esteem. It's like we don't have anything theoretical in the paper discussing it, so it almost comes out of the blue. And if others agree, like that is kind of like what people haven't really included in this stuff before. So that would be different about your stuff. And of course the EMA stuff is also, but I think it doesn't sound like a lot of folks have included that in these examinations.
Mhm.
Are we leaning towards keeping it, but making sure that we have space for that and discussion for that in the intro? Or are we leaning towards cutting it? And Doris, I think this was your idea in feedback from the thesis. So do you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it has to be in there. I'm saying if it's in there, we really have to put it in early.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
agree. I think that like largely speaking, like the theoretical rationale for a lot of this is really missing. Um, and so honing in on the pieces that are most important to you and making sure that there's theory to support one, why we're even looking at it, and then two, the hypotheses that you've generated for each of them too.
And I think you have some, you kind of allude to some of those things in various different parts of your paper. And you have a section where you even talk about like, you discuss a couple of different theories, but you're really talking about them in terms of like theoretically, what's the function of fat talk, right? Whereas here, I think, that stuff is sort of interesting, but to really just hone in on what you're talking about, it's like, okay, what's the theoretical framework for why we think fat talk is having an effect on body dissatisfaction? And is fat talk really different from other conversations, right? Is there evidence for that? If no, then great. Like we're going to do it, right? If there is, then what's the evidence, right? For some of that. Um and how can we answer like those specific questions, right? So like if we look at some of the other stuff too, um you know I think we know that relationship quality is important and it kind of goes hand in hand, but I think we need more emphasis of that as well. Because, like, there's tons of findings that you cite with body dissatisfaction or like other sort of interrelated things, and relationship quality is in there somehow. But the biggest discussion of relationship quality is just that like friends are important, right?
Right.
And so it's like, okay, great, friends are important, but does it matter what friend we're talking to or the relationship quality? And I think you do have some findings in there about that, but I think really like explicitly using your space and time to talk about that and guide us to that point instead of like, kind of summarizing each study and giving us the methodology and some of that. I mean, I could go up and look at a paper and figure out like what the methodology is. I think like summarizing and really synthesizing like these are the main points and this is why relationship quality is important. This is why self-worth is important. This is why we care about body dissatisfaction, like why it's a relevant outcome. I think really kind of streamlining some of that will help us then figure out where we want to cut away some of these other
Mhm.
analyses too, right? Because I think related to the theoretical point, and sort of like what we're missing there, that really should be guiding also those multi-level mediation models. And so I think they're a good idea, like generally, right? I love a mediation model, but right now I'm on the fence about them in terms of how much we really need them, depending on the theoretical framework and how you really think these are functioning, right? Because I also tend to think when I think mediation model that like this one thing is measured first or it's coming first, the mediator's kind of coming second, and it's this like mechanistic effect, and then the outcome comes. And the way we have it set up right now is like A and C in the model, basically down here are EMA, and then B is like the pretest measure. And so for me, when I typically think about it, I would be thinking about the driver as being that pretest measure because it was measured first and it's kind of like their state level.
Right.
And then these other things are happening after. But I don't know, like, I don't know if that theoretically makes sense either. Like, I see where you're coming from a theoretical standpoint that maybe their like state levels are driving the momentary associations. So I think we just have to like also think theoretically about what we really expect to happen here,
Mhm.
and then use some of that to maybe make decisions about what analyses make sense to keep or not keep, if that makes sense. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Nicolette, can you show us the mediation models so we can kind of picture it?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is not set up the way Reagan just described it, where the
Yeah.
pretest
Hmm.
pretest is first. We're
Hmm.
looking to see if the pretest is driving an outcome variable, but the level of fat talk
Hmm.
versus other would be more the mediator. That's how you
Hmm.
were describing it, right, Reagan?
Yeah.
Can you
And
can you see that, Nicolette? Kind of how that would be flipped a bit?
Yeah.
it doesn't have to. I mean, people are getting more flexible, I think, on on some of this stuff too, but that's how I kind of traditionally think about it when I'm thinking about like what does a mediation model mean?
Hmm.
Um, Follow-up question, I can't remember. In the pilot study, and I know that this will be a different sample, so this could change, but remind me, were the pretest and the EMA body dissatisfactions correlated?
No.
So that's my other concern is like putting a bunch of stock in this because when I typically do a mediation model too, I'll do independent linear regressions and make sure that all of the pathways are significant before I even do a mediation model. And then if one of them is not, then I won't even do the mediation model because I won't expect any partial or full mediation. And so I am a little concerned that like because those do tend to be picking up on different things, like the pretest and the EMA tend to be picking up on different things. And some of that's also a function of sample size, I think we figured out in the pretest.
And some of it too
And
is,
I don't know what to expect here. Yeah.
yeah, some of it too, Reagan, is we had the full, or did we? This is where I get confused, Nicolette. Did we have the same measure for body image state as we did in the EMA?
No. So we had the EDQ BD subscale at pretest, but then during EMA, it was a different question.
Hmm.
It was did your body image get better or worse?
Yeah.
And
Okay.
now
So then it
we've got
might change. It's probably going to be
Hmm.
more highly stable. Yeah, it's
yeah.
probably
Hmm.
going to be more highly stable.
And now the two items at the bottom right would be the pretest and the EMA.
Hmm. Okay.
Ag-
It'll be more highly
Hmm.
stable then. Yeah. That makes sense. Okay. Follow-up question about sample size. Do I know some of this last time was like people would say no, and so they would opt out because they didn't experience fat talk in the last hour or whatever, or most recently, and kind of the way. I guess I'm on the fence about like how confident we feel like we're gonna get tons more people saying like, yes, I'm engaging in these fat talk conversations on
Hmm.
a momentary basis, or are we gonna end up just having to average across these again?
ah,
I had a similar thought, especially with like the design over 3 days. And Nicolette, I don't think this was reflected in the written documentation. Maybe I just missed it, but in lab, you talked about it being over, like everyone would do it in the same weekend. And I think that approach is really different from the other EMA studies that have looked at fat talk, who are doing 5 days or 7 days, and it's more like a rolling enrollment type of deal where, like I might complete it Monday through Friday, but Reagan may also be participating in the study and doing it like Wednesday through Sunday. Um, so I think like we have a measurement concern here, but then also like a method concern of are we giving people enough chances to experience the fat talk to be able to report it to begin with?
Right.
I mean, I think we don't, yeah, I think we don't know until we try. I raise it as a concern more so like, I think we just need to be prepared for the fact that if we still get low numbers like we did last time, and then we're comparing fat talk to no fat talk, those sample sizes might look drastically different. It's going
Yeah.
to give us some difficulties and some trouble with comparing them statistically, given the unequal sample sizes and maybe what those distributions look like. We can deal with that statistically, right? Like we can do some logarithmic transformations or like account for unequal distributions or something like that. But I'm just trying to think like and at least prepare us like let's also realize like even if we're doing something like this, we might have to pivot because we don't know how many fat talk like conversations we're going to get, even 5 times a day,
Yeah.
like 3 days a week. Like I would almost think I mean, this would be a total change up. So again, I hesitate to even offer this, but to me, I almost wonder if we did like one diary a day at night and we're like, hey, did you engage in fat talk today or something?
Mhm.
Or how many times do you think you engaged in fat talk today? Or both of those questions. And, what were these conversations like? Because then that might be a little bit easier to manage with data. And even if they don't deal with that talk like on a certain day or something like that, we can kind of average across days a little bit easier rather than like 5 times a day, 5 times a day. And then we end up with like these huge sample sizes of no fat talk and then like a really small sample size of some fat talk. But I
Mhm.
know that's like not what we envisioned and what we conceptualized here, but I'm also just trying to think of alternatives so that we can maximize your data collection and get the highest quality data possible so that you have more data points potentially to work with.
Mhm.
I
So
don't know.
so you're thinking one, I mean, yeah, this is making a lot of sense. So you're thinking pre-test and one EMA sample for every person?
Well, or you could still do a 3 or a 5 day EMA period, but only give them a daily diary like once at night and randomize it between 5 and 10 p.m. or something like that. And
Oh, okay.
make it like
So
a nighttime diary.
yeah, okay. So a
Reflecting on
retroactive
your
each night.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like think about your day to day because it's still recent enough that they should be able to accurately report if like, oh, I was with so and so today and this person and we ate lunch and I talked about this. Like it's not, it's still a daily diary approach and an EMA approach. It's just on a slightly different scale than like multiple moments
I,
across an entire day.
I like that.
Mhm.
I like that. Now back to Cassidy's point. In the thesis, we did Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It wasn't the same 3 days for everybody, just depending on when they rolled into the study. But we did that deliberately, and now I'm kind of questioning, Cassidy, you were sort of saying whenever a person signs up, they start it then. And then it's all over the place. And is that a good thing? I guess I'm asking.
I think it increases ecological validity. I think that's how most EMA studies run. It's also a pain to manage. And so that's what I'm trying to think through what's going to make this a manageable dissertation, and be able to answer some of the questions that Nicolette has posed. And that's like, I thought like, okay, this really needs to probably be a 5 or 7 day EMA period. But then I was like, I think that's a lot and that you're going to have so much data. And I had thought of daily diary too, as maybe a way to extend your period, but not get as many data points. Um,
I like the daily diary. I think we've all landed on a good option there. Um,
Yeah, because I think it will still give us the opportunity to capture whether they're experiencing fat talk or not, and they can answer those questions, still, um, whether they say yes or no. But then it's just fewer data points to have to like average across if for some reason we're seeing low frequency of fat talk just generally for whatever reason.
Mhm.
yeah.
And I worry that the weekend is like a history effect of sorts, in that weekends are weird in some ways, where, like, if a student goes home to see their family, you're cutting out chunks of social interactions.
And some
Um,
and some students work all weekends, and some students are hanging out with their friends. Yeah.
yeah. They also may like sleep the day away on a Saturday morning, into, like, because they're catching up on sleep and things. So, I don't know if we do want everybody filling it out on a weekend.
What I did with my most recent sleep to get through to avoid this problem when I was doing daily diaries with sleep and uh well, Denise, you might remember this. We did this with Hannah, although it was kind of like a nuance to the project. But this was with Hannah's project where we did some daily diary kind of cross validation of sleep and physical activity. But we basically made it so that it was 3 typical weekdays. And so for any given person in the study, like depending on when they come into the lab and we get them sort of set up with stuff, they could do it like a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, right? And so you might get a little bit of overlap here and there with the weekend, but for the most part, we're thinking about 3 typical weekdays where we're capturing that because that is probably because the weekends are weird and they're super weird for sleep and physical activity, right? You might be
Hmm.
packing in all your sleep or all your physical activity on the weekend and trying to make up for things.
Hmm.
Um, I typically do keep it, they can do it across the week and choose kind of any 3 days, right? Or you could have them just do it for a 5 day period, Monday to Friday, and then process that data and, bring people in. And maybe you're running other people, and bringing people in if you have to do a lab visit or a training or something like that, then you're bringing them in while people are still already doing that study week. But then they're going to all start, you have a new cohort that starts on Monday. Right. And so then you just train an RA to know, okay, this is your group this week, like this is your cohort. And I mean, it is still tricky. You have to like stay on top of it, but it is more manageable and in tapping into like the ecological validity piece, but having some buffer, I think it works well and it's helpful. I mean, we did that for cortisol sampling in a lot of studies I did too. Like it was always 3 to 5 typical weekdays because the weekends are going to just be too weird.
And how many days do you think would be optimal for these diaries? 3, 5? I mean,
I say we shoot for 5 if we can, if we're only going to do it once a day.
okay.
I say we start them on a Monday, start sending a diary that night, and then they finish on a Friday, and then they're done.
Okay.
That way we could create a cutoff and say if we only have two, like they have to have minimum two to give us some scores, right? Or we could take anything that's available, and see if we need to do cutoffs, but then at least we're giving ourselves more opportunities to have more data points and more variability.
Okay. If everybody agrees. Let me take a quick survey of who needs to roll off to something else at 1 o'clock.
I'm good.
I'm good.
Okay, Nicolette, can you go back to the big visual?
Mhm.
So in the spirit of condensing, um, how do you all feel if we endorse you, especially if we gather the data for the self-worth, but we remove that from the dissertation? So that could be somebody else could own that in the future. You could have it, Doris, if you wanted. Anybody else? Are we okay with that?
Yeah, and I think that
Hmm.
that probably is a good starting point for theoretical framing and justification for collecting that as part of a thesis and part of an IRB as to why we would collect it anyway. But
Hmm.
we just explicitly state somewhere that, that's not the goal of this paper, the current study right now. But we just make it in the IRB and the consent form that this is something of interest and we're interested in how this might be related.
Well, an IRB just usually likes to see the materials. They really don't seem, at least in my experience, they don't seem to care about the design and the hypotheses and analyses. They just want to make sure you're not abusing the human subject in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would just say like even if we're going to collect it but not use it for this, let's make sure we can when we're consenting people in that they know that this is a question we are going to follow up on and like potentially publish on later and things like that. But
Okay. Okay. That makes
and
sense.
just be like, hey, we're interested in how like fat talk and self-worth and all these things are related and like they don't really like you're saying they don't really need to know the extent to which we're like super invested in that right now for this study. But I think that makes sense to include it as part of maybe the theoretical framing and framework, but explore it later if depending on what Doris thinks.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, and I think this paper changes substantially if we put it in. because it's like you need sections about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So and I'm not asking that you do that.
Okay, how about the other two pre-tests? So we've got the traditional fat talk scale, NBTS, and we've got the now abbreviated two-item body image pretest. Do we want to keep those?
I think they functioned with good reliability and validity the first time, and I do think I would say whatever we choose, we keep it consistent
Okay.
across the pretest and probably the EMA, but I don't know what folks think.
Nicolette, for your thesis, I wasn't on that committee, so I don't know, but the pretest, did you use the EDEQ
Yes.
13 for your
I
pretest?
I used just the body dissatisfaction subscale.
Okay.
But it was longer than two items, right,
It was
Nicolette?
just the two
It was
items.
just the two items. Okay. And it didn't predict.
No.
But we did, well, it didn't predict, but then we asked them, does your body image improve or get worse? We did not use the same two items in EMA, and now we're planning to.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. My only concern about that is that it's just a two-item measure, so it's not getting you're not getting at the breadth of body dissatisfaction with that. And then you also change the directions and the anchors of which because it's intended to be answered like the number of days within the past 28 days, and then you changed it from like a never to frequently scale. So that's like a really big change for the measure. I just wondered if there was something else that wouldn't require all those changes and you could get to a little bit more breadth for the body dissatisfaction. Um, like the EPSI, for example, like it already has that, the scale that you want to use, your anchors, it already has that. Um, and it's a broader definition or conceptualization of body dissatisfaction. I was hesitant to recommend it for EMA because you don't want to have that many items in your EMA survey, but with a daily diary survey, you could have a few more items. So I
Ah,
think you've given yourself a little bit more freedom there to have a broader measure of body dissatisfaction. And because the EDEQ looks at dissatisfaction with weight and shape, like that's pretty narrow. Um,
and
so
what scale are you talking about, Cassidy? I missed it a second ago.
I just, the EPSI, the Eating Pathology Symptoms Inventory has a body dissatisfaction subscale. I think it's like 5 or 6 items instead of two. So it's not going to
That's
make
still
it
a
that
lot.
much longer. But it's, I think it adds a lot to what how you're operationalizing body dissatisfaction in your study.
Okay, I like that. Nicolette, are you okay switching that out?
Yeah, that's fine.
And
Okay.
I think too, related to that point, with some of this, just thinking really carefully too about the conceptualization because or at least changing some of this maybe in your thesis. I put a comment in there. You do have a section where you're sort of making a point in terms of like this is what we mean by body fat and why we're using this term or fat talk and this is why we're using this terminology versus this is what we mean by negative body talk. And you sort of make the argument that they're distinct from one another and we're going to use fat talk, but then most of the scales that we're using are related to negative body talk, maybe, right? Like the negative body talk scale and negative body talk conversation. So I think either I would just like take that out of your thesis and just be like these things are overlapping and they're really similar, but maybe here's the slight distinct differences between them because that's also sort of some of my question with using maybe the EPSI versus using the EDQ body dissatisfaction because I think you made some sort of argument about one of them being just about like weight and shape versus others being broader.
Yeah.
And so I think we just need to also kind of hone in on like which one of these are we talking about? And let's just stay super consistent. And if we need to like make up a couple of items of our own that tap really specifically or explicitly into fat talk, then maybe we need to ask about those instead. Um,
The field
but
is
I don't know this as much. So
Yeah, the field has moved over to negative body talk
okay.
for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that yeah, the purpose of
Okay.
that was more to yeah, and maybe it wasn't clear, but to state that those are kind of thought of like synonymously, like just to kind of state that's why like throughout the manuscript the term fat talk is used. Um,
Okay. Okay. Got it. Okay, that helps a little bit. Yeah. Um,
But I think for the purpose of the actual design, and I understand, and I've done the same thing, body talk is broad, but I'm going to use the term fat talk, but it means to represent. But
okay.
but for the design of the dissertation, I think we need to be consistent with the negative body talk. Or we can move the whole literature review and start rephrasing and making sure that we're clear of when others are measuring negative body talk in general, when were they measuring fat talk specifically, um, and just
Maybe.
and move over to the negative body talk. It's more consistent with modern literature.
Yeah. You all know that the four of you know more about that than I do. So I will defer to you on that one. I think just the bringing up of like the different conceptualizations and like this is really why we're going to like use this terminology throughout the paper, but they're the same, but they're not, kind of threw me off. And I was like, okay, well, if we're really just referring to this as fat talk and that's maybe not the same thing, and maybe I just was, in my reading, I was kind of like getting caught up, but I was like, if they're not the same thing, then why are we still using like negative body talk scales? And if they're different, but maybe they're not,
Mhm.
right? Like, and maybe it's just maybe clarifying that like these are similar overlapping terms. I
Mhm.
feel like they do that with effortful control and self-regulation in child and adolescent psychology all the time. They're like, and effortful control and self-regulation and self-control, it's like all the same thing.
I would my opinion on this is to Nicolette talk about the history of fat talk, but then shift all the way through. We're going to call this negative body talk, and that's really kind of what we're focusing on operationally now in the design. So a little
Yeah.
bit of
Mhm.
the history and then a shift, and I don't think that'll be a whole lot to manage.
Is anybody holding to that? No, in this paper, it's gonna be fat talk, or is that really a thing of the past now?
Well, there's some people who feel like that's very stigmatizing now.
Mhm.
To focus on, it's kind of like what Cassidy was saying, to narrowly focus on weight and shape and not all the other things like skin and other appearance
Yeah,
things that
yeah.
bother people too, or don't. Um, so
So,
no,
so it
it's
seems like no, nobody's really trying to argue like
it.
this, this stays here, and
I don't think so. I think it's just Nichter and Vukovic. That's what they called it initially, and then that stuck for a long time until people got upset about it.
Mhm, mhm,
Yeah. Um, Others okay with that?
Yeah.
mhm.
Okay, let's talk about these sort of like the DVs and what we want to keep and what we want to consider removing. We've added so instead for both the body image and both the relationship quality, instead of saying better, worse, we've now got, I'm just gonna say static measures for those. The Fat Talk Thoughts is brand new. I like that, but then have I made things a lot more complicated?
I have a question.
Okay.
Um, so how much do we care about relationship quality?
That was the brand new thing in EMA,
Well,
right?
we had that in the thesis.
It brand new in published studies.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
that was like body image had been tracked, but
Okay.
the relationship quality and Nichter and Vukovic came out initially and were like, "Oh, this is this thing that bonds girls and women to one another." But then there's been very little literature on that over time.
Okay.
There's been a lot more focus on fat talk and body image and eating disorders and stuff like that.
Okay.
But I guess the question is, Nicolette, is this an important part that we keep? And I'm kind of thinking, yeah, relationship quality actually I think is more important than the thoughts.
I'm only asking that too because we originally in the thesis we had social support as a pretest measure to sort of get at that maybe state level relationship qualities or support. And that was like I think maybe if we're going to do some sort of state level relationship qualities, then maybe we do something other than social support like next time. I don't think that like didn't map on, but maybe we could find something closer. But that's the only thing. I mean, that's of the EMA stuff. One of the things that we've really removed is some state measure of relationship quality. So that's why I was asking, like, how much do we care about this? How central is this to the research question and what we're getting at? Because we know it matters, but um,
I
maybe
think
it ends up like self-worth where it doesn't matter right now. I don't know.
I think the EMA part of the relationship quality is the additive part to the literature,
Okay.
and do we need a different, well, right now we have no pretest. And the rationale for that, right, Nicolette, was that we were measuring this general social support. And then when we're asking them after a particular Fat Talk interaction, did you feel closer or more distant from this one person? And they didn't relate. Um, and so we got rid of the pre-test, and now we're just looking at, so they've told us who they've had a conversation with, whether it was Fat Talk or non-Fat Talk. And then we look at the relationship quality with that particular person, which I do think there's a little bit of literature that could suggest that the relationship quality is more intimate with the body image talk or fat talk than talking about the weather. But then there could be other intimate conversations too.
I think that's why I was trying to get at my first question, which is like, are there people that you do this more with? And like I was trying to tap into that somehow, like that it bonds us with certain people, right? Like this type of talk. Um, and I don't think we're capturing it here or anything like that, but I think that was the spirit behind, like, if I think about when I, derogate myself in some way, it'd be with somebody I feel very close to.
Yeah.
Um, so going back to what Reagan just said, I was under the impression that like this is supposed to be all about relationship quality because it's even in your title, right? Like it's about
Yeah.
how this body talk affects your relationships. Maybe we're not honing in on that enough if that's really what we want from this study.
Yeah.
It's the sparsest area in the literature. So I would like to keep that, but I don't know. Back to you, Reagan. Is there a better pretest, or should we just not
Oh,
pretest it and look at it as what happens to relationship quality with whatever that person is, depending on the conversation type?
um, I don't know. There might be another measure out there. I haven't done extensive literature. I was mostly asking about that because, yeah, it seemed like to me in reading this, there was sort of a disconnect in that, like, there's actually very little about relationship quality as an outcome or how it's related to fat talk. I feel like maybe I just like have read too many papers. I don't know. And I was like grading too many things. But I don't feel like that is a major focus of the introduction right now. Is like, here's how fat talk affects your relationship um, or how your relationship quality fits in with fat talk and body dissatisfaction, right? Because if the question is really like, fat talk has a negative impact on your body dissatisfaction, but most of that is dependent on your relationship quality, then we should just be doing one interaction. Like, let's just do an interaction and like a linear regression and call it a day to answer our question. You know what I mean? And we can do like a multi-level one. I'm not saying like scrap the whole thing, but I'm saying like maybe that's the central um, analysis, not some of these mediation models or, do you feel more or less close. If it's just like I am more or less close to people on average, like that I'm engaging in fat talk conversations with, then let's do it as an interaction effect and test it. But right now, it feels like almost all of the background and literature review is on fat talk and how it's related to body dissatisfaction and
Mhm.
some interrelated stuff. And there are some things about relationship quality and it is mentioned in there, but I think if relationship quality is really the new innovative piece, then we really need to push that forward and think about how that's going to play a big part of the main analyses and scrap some of the other analyses that don't even include it, other than maybe really basic, like descriptive and preliminary, if that's the question. And maybe that's how we decide what to cut and what to keep.
I think you're right, Reagan. I think that is the missing piece in the cutting edge of the research.
Mhm.
Um, and I like that. I'm having difficulty in my head right now, kind of picturing exactly what you're talking about. Your words made sense, but I'm having a hard time from a design perspective picturing it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the design necessarily changes. I'm just thinking of doing some of those interaction effects, like, the significant findings that Nicolette actually had from the thesis, where it was like, okay, higher levels of fat talk or more frequent fat talk is related to higher body dissatisfaction, but only when you're doing fat talk with somebody that you have a closer relationship with, right? Versus a less close relationship.
Right. We looked at
Like
those
something like that.
yeah, we looked at those separately in the thesis. We did not look at those interacting together.
So like I almost think like yes, we could keep like that same question. I think I don't know if we could take a quick look again and see if like from an analysis standpoint, it makes sense to keep that same question. But I think like, do you feel less close or more close to people, or how you could even ask like how close did you feel with with the person you were engaging in fat talk with on average, right? Or something like that. And that's going to give us some sort of continuous moderation variable where then we can test that with the you know, fat talk predicting like body dissatisfaction, right? But it being dependent on your level of relationship quality or what the quality of the relationship is, maybe, right? Would that answer some of your question, Doris?
Yeah, I guess it keeps confusing me that if quality is the outcome, why are we putting it the step before the body stuff? Like, you know what I mean? Like, could
As the
sound like what,
moderator.
yeah, like if our outcome is quality, I keep getting confused when we're putting it earlier in the model and we're predicting like dissatisfaction. Because
Yeah.
I keep thinking that quality is supposed to be the DV.
Yeah, but I think we're almost talking about it as being the mediator. You've got the fat talk, yes or
Or
no,
the
right?
moderator.
And then you've moderator, okay, and then you've got relationship quality,
And then the dissatisfaction.
and then
So
the
if our outcomes,
dissatisfaction.
okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think you're right.
I mean, I
That
think you could treat it as a dependent variable, but again, I think we'd want to think carefully theoretically, like to what extent do we think fat talk is driving relationship quality? Like is whether you're engaging in fat talk or how often or the type of fat talk thoughts and conversation that you're having, is that really changing your relationship quality? Or is it that is really targeting your level of how you feel about yourself? Or
Right.
your perception about your body, and the quality of that is what is changing that relationship and
yeah,
the extent to which, because maybe if you don't have a close relationship, it's like we've talked about, then you're like, I don't care, like whatever, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter if I engage in
right.
a fat talk conversation with you because you don't matter to me and you don't affect how I think about myself. Right.
Hmm.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I like that.
Okay, so
Nicolette,
not so it's not the quality isn't the thing we're absolutely predicting. It's really how it ends up interacting with fat talk to then how you feel about yourself.
your body image. Nicolette,
Mhm.
what do you think? I
Yeah, this is your. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm hijacking this, but I'm just trying to think how we can like include all of this in a way that we are like really answering your question in the most targeted way that we possibly can, so that we're not just like, yeah, do this, and then here we are 3 years later because we set you on.
No, we don't
And
want
it's
to.
a cool project. It's really cool. Like you could spend 3 more years on this, right? We don't need you to.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I think simplifying it is a good idea for sure.
Okay. My final thought, I liked the thoughts collection, the Fat Talk thoughts, but again, thinking like that could be a whole different study. How do we feel about collecting that data but removing that from her dissertation?
Yeah.
I'm good with that.
Okay, yay. Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
again, I think that's like great information, but that's
Hmm.
paper 3, paper 4 on the
yeah,
dissertation later. Yeah.
yeah. And then when I think about the things that we've discussed today, I think we're still considering the literature, we're still cutting edge with this, Nicolette, which is important. You're doing something that's newer and better than has been done. That usually makes things more publishable depending on what you get. Um, but how do you feel, Nicolette, about collecting data, and we'd have to put it in IRB, but we would just get rid of the self-worth, we'd get rid of the fat talk thoughts, and just keep your dissertation simpler.
Yeah, like collecting that data but not proposing the analyses with it. Yeah, that's what I would like to do.
Okay. Do you want to unshare for a bit? Do we have any more comments, questions we want to think through before I ask Nicolette to step out?
I just want to say that I did pull up the EPSI and it is very shape and weight focused too. So,
Uh,
Nicolette, you can look at it. I don't feel strongly that you use it. So, like, if you wanted to, I'm just saying with the daily diary, you probably have more room to ask more than two questions.
Yeah.
So you have a little bit more freedom there, but it may not be the EPSI.
Okay.
we could, I like your idea, Cassidy, of making it broader. I know when we've asked questions, and this is a long time ago, we've just asked people about body image. They misconstrued it not as the way we think of body image as a construct. They construed it as the image you project, like
Mhm.
your look or your fashion.
Hmm.
It's like, no, that's not at all. But if there's a way that we could find something, Nicolette, that kind of captured your judgment and your feelings about your body, that's really what we're trying, your body, your whole body and appearance. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
what we're trying to get at.
Mhm.
And I know, like after Shraddha and Tori's research, we delved into skin and hair, different elements.
Mhm.
So go ahead and unshare, Nicolette.
Mhm.
Anything else we want to discuss right now before I figure out how to move Nicolette, Nicolette to the other room?
I will just say, I thought your presentation was excellent. It was really clear. The flow of it made a ton of sense, and I think it clarified a lot of stuff for me in the document. And so I think I know you're pressed up against time with a lot of this too. And so I think though the way that you're thinking about things, if we can like translate some of this into the document, then we're in really good shape because, the presentation you did was great. And I think your thought process behind it makes total sense. So I hope you don't think I'm like let's change the whole thing and cut everything out. That wasn't my intention to like show up and be like, surprise, like we're cutting everything, or something like that. Like, I think you did a really good job and you've worked really hard on this, and it is really innovative in a lot of ways. I just want to see like that piece of it projected and demonstrated in your writing. I think you sell yourself short and you are just kind of reviewing the literature and like playing it a little bit safe instead of being like, no, these are the new things we're doing. This is the stuff we're adding. This is really innovative. This is how what we're doing is different. And I think you are doing a lot of that. And it just hasn't fully come across yet. But it's
Yeah,
like, we're getting there. But it came across more in the presentation than it did even in the paper. So like even since you sent us the document, right? It's clear that you've been like really thinking and streamlining some of this kind of stuff. So I just wanted to
Mhm.
say it was really good. I'm sorry. I remember being in your seat and being like, literally the day before my data meeting, one of my mentors was like, I think we're gonna have to redo all of your analyses. And I was like, oh, right? Like panicked. So you did a good job.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
we'll bring Nicolette back here in a little bit, but let's go ahead, Nicolette. I figured I'm going to put you in the waiting room, which is not a timeout, and I'll bring you back in a little bit, okay?
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Denise, do you want to cut the recording off?
Yes, please. Thank you.